you've got some. Thank you, Annie. I hope you've got a little ray of sunshine where you are. I'm based at the top of Bluebell Hill between Medway and Maidstone, and the sun is shining, and I just think it makes the world feel a little bit nicer when we have sunshine. The promise of spring is upcoming. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today Furley Page. They are our keynote presenters, and we have Eleanor Rogers, Patrick Glencross, and Mr. Andrew Masters. Andrew, good morning to you. I had the pleasure of meeting Andrew at the Gillingham Football Stadium at Priestfields, and he was absolutely magnificent. I'm just wondering, Annie, can we rename Mr. Masters to Andrew Masters, Furley Page Solicitors, if that would be all right?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you so much. These events would never run smoothly, but for the help and the support of our technical wizards at Kent and Victor Chamber. So I have Annie Breen to thank for keeping everything on track, keeping us on time, and ensuring that the slides are there. We're hoping that today will be enjoyable, useful, and informative for you guys. We've got some PowerPoint presentations, both from Ellie and from Patrick. There will be lots of opportunities for you all to ask questions. They're going to field questions at the end of each segment of their presentation, but if you've got something burning that's in your head, do please put it in the chat. And what I'll do is, when the opportunity arises for us to pose questions to both Ellie and Patrick, we'll unmute you and you can ask the questions directly, and it will be just a little bit more interactive. Without further ado, Andrew, was there anything that you wanted to say in welcoming all our guests today?
No, just to say, Kaz, thank you as always to Kent and Victor for all of your hard work and excellent work behind the scenes. Really loved it, by the way, last week. It was great, and really excited about hearing Patrick and Ellie talk today. So thanks again to Kent and Victor. Thank you, Kaz.
You're very welcome. Actually, we're super excited. I had the pleasure of a few minutes with Ellie and Patrick, and we were saying there's a lot of changes. So today is going to be right on message, and as I say to you guys, hopefully informative. Without further ado, if I could cut to you guys.
Super. So I shall get technical and share my screen.
Thank you.
There we go. Hopefully that's all working. So I'm sadly, I suppose, talking about the very topical issue of what can employers do to help their staff, support their staff during the cost of living crisis. So let's see how we go. Just So just a reminder, these are the figures that came out of the budget and the Office of Budget Responsibility, OBR, forecast last week. Figures not quite as gloomy as they were looking in the autumn of last year, but still pretty gloomy for this year as well as obviously last year. So the particular issue causing, if you like, the cost of living crisis is the difference between where inflation is and where earnings is, and it's that gap which is resulting in that strain on everybody, as we'll see in a minute. So inflation peaked at 11.1% as the annual CPI figure last year. OBR says it's due to be 6.1% if you annualize it across the calendar year 2023, expected to be falling to 2.9% by the end of the calendar year. And obviously, only yesterday we had the inflation figures, which had an unexpected increase back into double digits of 10.4%, particularly driven by food prices and clothing costs as well. And so, yeah, generally speaking, the main contributing factors to inflation in the last year have been energy bills, so gas and electricity bills, food, beverages, and also fuel costs as well. Nominal earnings growth. So the data from last year was 6.2%, slightly higher in the private sector, where earnings were close to 7%, than in the public sector, where it was 2.5%. and predicted this year, 2023, to be 5%. So you start correlating those figures against where the inflation figures are, and you can start seeing where the gap is. And 2024 expected to be 1.8%. It's worth highlighting a particular factor in where earnings have gone last year and are projected to go this year, has been in unemployment rates and difficulties in filling vacancies. So the OBR report mentioned 57% of employers struggling to fill vacancies, a third of them planning to address this by raising wages. So that, I say, that's been a particular driver behind earnings growth this year and will be next year. Flip side, it is predicted that as unemployment starts to creep up, which it is projected to do over the next 18 months, that will have if you like, a dampening effect on pay growth later this year. So the fall in living standards, this was the sort of headline figure that came out of the OBR report, talking about the largest 2-year fall in real living standards since the national statistics record started, which were in the 1950s. So 2.5% gap of last year, and expected fall this year of 2.6%, and not until next year before there's a growth again. So again, the OBR says the fall between 2021 and up to 2024 takes the RHDI, the real household disposable income, to its lowest level since 2014. And even when we get to 2027, 28, real living standards will remain around 0.5% below what they were before the COVID pandemic. And I've lifted there the graph from the OBR report, which shows literally graphically that drop in living standards. So you can look back at where we were with the in 2008, 2009 with the financial crisis and the recession then, or way back to the recession in the early 1980s, and the falling living standards which we've had in the last year and in the current year are outpacing even the impact of those historic recessions. The other aspect really to highlight from, again, data I've culled here from the OBR report is the impact of the jargon term is fiscal drag. So there is a growing impact of the freezing of tax bands and tax allowances, which has been in place since April 2021 and is due to be in place until April 2028. And the impact of that freeze, I say what they call the fiscal drag, is to bring a lot of people into paying tax who historically weren't paying tax before, and equally to move some people up from the basic tax band into the higher rate tax band. And I've given you the figures there as to the numbers who will be brought up in that way. That freezing of the bands increases tax receipts by nearly £30 billion a year, equivalent to 4p increase in the basic rate of income tax. I say those are the OBR's figures, and it's worth thinking about. Your nominal earnings may be growing by 5% this year, but for some people that is going to have the effect of pushing them into paying tax where they weren't paying tax before, or pushing them into being higher rate taxpayers when they were only basic rate taxpayers before. So that's enough doom and gloom. And that's even without mentioning interest rates, which are predicted to be increased by a quarter of a percentage point today. What can you do as an employer to help your staff when they're facing nearly 6% drop in living standards over the 2 years? There was an article by the accountants KPMG, which I read, which said, look, there are two things you can do to support with the cost of living increase employees' pay or reduce their costs, which is good as far as it goes. And it's sort of, double entry bookkeeping, look at the plus side, look at the minus side. But there's a lot more, actually. There's a lot of indirect actions that you as an employer can take, which have a beneficial effect on either the pay side or the benefits stroke reducing staff costs side of things. But there's also a whole element, which I'll come on to later, thinking about employee well-being, thinking about how can you give, it's not necessarily financial support, but it's support as an employer to assist your staff, looking after their welfare, looking after their well-being. CIPD survey, April 2022, 1 in 4 employees say that money worries affect their ability to do their job. So it's not just sort of driven by looking after the welfare of your staff, but from a purely commercial point of view, if you can help your staff get over their financial worries or help them through it, there's a very strong business case, a commercial case in favour of showing your commitment, making efforts to support the financial well-being of your staff. But of course, bearing in mind, a lot of those pressures that your employees are facing, you as a business are facing as well. Look at your rising energy bills, for example, look at your supplier costs as well. So I'm obviously conscious that some of these things have a price tag. So I'm sort of keen to find things that have a lower price tag, or there are tax savings that you can achieve at the same time. So let's look at the first of the elements in my pyramid, the question of pay. So targeted pay rises is a possibility. May choose to have a single level pay increases across the board, but as I say, what you might want to do is focus pay rises towards the lower end of the spectrum of your payroll. You might also want to think about having pay differentials, maintaining pay differentials for staff, if you like, in the layers above your national minimum wage tier of staff. So say, for example, you're running a care home business or domiciliary care business, and you've got staff at a supervisor level who, they're one grade above your care workers. As we'll see in a moment, the minimum wage rates are going up for your for the care workers, but you will want to maintain pay differences for that next tier or next couple of tiers of your workforce. So say those sorts of supervisor or senior roles. Another thing to think about is one-off bonus payments, and a lot of sort of household name employers are doing this. Be it the supermarkets, be it the banks, etc. And sometimes actually labeling it as a cost of living bonus payment can have the effect of supporting staff morale and showing, yes, we're conscious of where you're coming from and fully aware of your pressures, can give some immediate financial assistance. I suppose there is a risk that, if it's £50 as a bonus, it could possibly backfire in your face. Mention the point there also, just to be aware of, there is a possible impact, a sort of unforeseen consequences impact for some employees who are in receipt of benefits such as universal credit or tax credits. There is a risk that a one-off bonus could interfere with their eligibility for benefits and, say, unintentionally cause them extra stress or financial hardship because they're having to battle with the DWP to get their benefits back on track. So possibly one way to address that or mitigate that is, rather than a single, here's a bonus in April 2023, is to split that bonus into a number of installments. So saying, look, we're going to do this in 3 or 4 installments over the course of the year. And I say, hopefully then that mitigates the risk of disrupting people's eligibility for universal credit or tax credits. One for your payroll to get their head round as to what the best way to approach that is going to be. So I mentioned national minimum wage. These wage rates were announced in the autumn. They come into effect on the 1st of April of this year, and they're broadly reflecting where the inflation indexes were in the course of last year. So the process is the Low Pay Commission comes forward with its recommendations to the government. almost always the government then implements it, which is what it did on this occasion. Estimated benefit some 2 million low paid workers. So as well as sort of keeping tabs with inflation and cost of living, there's also an agenda here for the government target is for the national living wage. So that's the highest of the minimum wage rates, to reach 2/3 of median hourly pay by April 2024, which is on track to do. And that is estimated as just shy of £11 per hour. So if you're looking into the crystal ball of, what are we going to be paying staff this time next year, I say budget for that figure of £11 an hour as the national living wage rate. Bottom bullet point there I've mentioned as well. So the national living wage rate is due to come down, as it did recently from age 25 in 2024. So this time next year, that national living wage rate will apply to employees and workers from age 21 upwards. So there may well be a cohort of your staff, say in that 21, 22 age bracket, who suddenly leap up with their pay levels because they then become eligible for the national living wage rate. So what else can you do as an employer to increase pay? So apart from purely, say, one-off bonuses, increasing the pay rates as well. Well, think about not just overtime opportunities, but there may be additional work opportunities elsewhere within the business. So there may be the possibility for somebody to do some work, maybe work based at home or work coming in at the weekends on top of what they do as their day job. For example, you operate a retail store, you have store staff who are working Monday to Friday, but there are chances for them to work from home, supporting a call center or online assistance with sales, say outside their hours working in the shop. So think laterally about those additional work opportunities that may be present. Another possibility is around annual leave entitlements. So if as an employer, you have a contractual leave entitlement which goes beyond the leave entitlement under the working time regulations, so that's your 5.6 weeks, 28 days for a full-time employee, you can have a scheme by which staff can buy and sell their annual leave. So the option of selling annual leave may be attractive as a way of, in effect, getting an extra couple of days pay. Flip side, particularly for those who've got caring responsibilities, how are we going to manage to, once the school holidays hit us, to without the expenses of external childcare costs, how are we going to manage through that time? Well, the option of being able to buy additional annual leave may be an attractive option in that scenario. So before we leave the question of pay, just a mention here of some other ways that through your payroll mechanism you may provide some support to your staff. So one of those, it's a fairly novel concept which I've seen referred to as income streaming, also referred to as a earned pay access. So it's a mechanism by which staff can draw down the earned wages, which, if you like, they've accrued before monthly payroll payday hits them, and it's a way that helps them to avoid relying on the payday loans and worse which are out there. So, for example, if you've got a monthly payroll scheme, you've got an employee who's clearly worked the first couple of weeks of the month, possibly done some overtime as well, and possibly even getting bonuses and commission. It's a way of drawing down on that income before they reach the end of the month. Loan consolidation is another option you may be able to offer through payroll. So you may have an employee who has accrued various debts, and they are then setting up a a device in order to repay those debtors as they are, and it's a way that you can help them navigate through that process. Possibly hardship funds, emergency loans is something you might be able to do. Salary sacrifice schemes, we'll see a couple of those in practice shortly, but it's again a measure by which there are some benefits that you can provide, be it around travel costs like bike to work schemes, or purchasing computer equipment, those sorts of things that you can help staff with. Secondary employment. So this is an area where, as an employer, you maybe want to be taking a bit of a broader view towards the reality of staff wanting to take up secondary employment. There was a report by Royal London last year which said 10 million UK workers are considering taking on a second job. You balance that with the fact of already well over a quarter, so again, data of 28% of full-time employees already working more than 48 hours per week. So there's a real tension there between, on the one hand, financial drivers saying, I need to go out and get a job working in the pub, doing cleaning jobs outside of hours. Already, staff, many of them already working very many hours under the sun and under the moon as well. So questions to think about here is that, is there going to be an impact on the employee's health and well-being if they go and take this job working at the weekends, working in the evenings? Is it going to impact on their performance given the nature of the job role that this individual is doing? Then think about the particular employment which they're asking to do. Is it going to breach their duties towards you? Maybe express duties of fidelity, also implied duties. Are they in reality going to be working for one of your direct competitors? Is it somehow the job that they're going to do going to compromise their ability to do their job with you? So very often the wording you've got in the employment contracts is saying that you need to have the prior consent of the employer before you take on other employment. So you need to address that process and address the sorts of questions. In what situations are we going to say, yes, we're happy for you to take on that other work? No, we're not happy. Think also about where employees have restrictive covenants, express clauses about not working for your clients, not working for your customers, either during their employment or for a period after their employment. And finally, on the question of secondary employment, is to highlight the point about exclusivity clauses. So since 2015, staff on 0 hours contracts there have been restrictions that, as an employer, you can't have exclusivity clauses which prevent 0 hours workers from working for anybody else. And that was extended in December of last year to cover what's called low income workers. So those who are earning less than £123 per week. Equally, it's prohibited to have a restriction which prevents them from working for other people. Another area where, as an employer, you may want to be a bit more flexible and sensitive at this time is thinking about flexible working, thinking about hybrid working, and how that those arrangements themselves may assist employees with juggling cost of living, and maybe the reason why they're particularly keen on those arrangements. And very often for employees, the question between, do I work from home if given the choice, do I work in the office, is that balance between, well, what are the costs of commuting in, what's the train fare, the bus fare, the fuel costs, as against what are the extra fuel costs if I'm working from home, having to get have the heating on all the day, or and the like. So just be conscious of those factors when thinking about hybrid working arrangements, thinking about flexible working requests that you receive, whether they're formal requests or those sort of informal requests as well. Particularly, recognise costs of childcare when in relation to flexible working requests where possible. And this is, it's not just me saying this, it is actually where the government is gradually getting to as well. You should be trying to accommodate flexible working requests anyway, but particularly, those where the arrangements, a big factor is in, we as a family are trying to juggle the cost of childcare. I need to be able to collect the children from school, from the nursery at such and such a time. That's why I want to be working from home on those days rather than in the office. Just a last mention there about the expenses of home working. If you remember, at the time of the pandemic and lockdown, there was a particular tax relief that came in. So where employees are required to be working from home, they could claim tax relief as part of their annual tax return. That scheme is actually disappearing next month. As an employer, you may still reimburse expenses for home working, either at that rate of £6 per week, £26 per month, or if actual expenses are higher, and it's obviously up to the employee to show that, you can reimburse those higher expenses. So moving gradually towards, well, what can we do on the cost side of things? What can we as an employer do to help reduce down the cost of the employee coming into work in the first place? So some various thoughts I've jotted down here. One is the question of season ticket loans. So that's a fairly familiar mechanism, and the tax legislation allows that to be done without incurring that being a taxable benefit from the employee side of things. I've mentioned there's something else which I only learned about going along to the event at Gillingham last week, which is that Arriva operate what they call an employer travel club scheme, and that's a monthly travel pass at a quite heavily discounted rate, which the employee is then paying on a direct debit basis, so a number of local employers use this scheme, such as Kent County Council, Kent Police, Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells, NHS Trust, Mid Kent College. So particularly larger employers seem to be tapping into this, but it's worth looking into as an option. I've given you the website address there as well. Again, talking about the tax legislation, there is a tax exemption if you are, as an employer, providing works buses, minibuses, for example, or indeed some employers providing subsidies to public bus services, so that it allows that particular bus route to regularly call at your place of work. Cycled work scheme's been around for some time. Again, there's a tax exemption under the Income Tax and Earnings and Pensions Act. Remember the particular rules that cycles or equipment have to be generally available to all employees of the employer, and the idea is that employees must use the cycle or the cycle equipment mainly for what they call qualifying journeys. You can have secondary use, leisure use, for example, but that is supposed to be a secondary usage of the bicycle and the gear which goes with it. Car parking, again, tax-free benefit under ITEPA, provided the car parking is at or near the place of work, even if there is another car park that's actually closer. Although in reality, local authorities may be levying charges against the employer if they are providing workplace parking for their employees. So on the one hand, yes, HMRC looks positively on it. On the other hand, you're being clobbered by the local authority with a levy sometimes. So opening up to general provision of benefits, so non-cash remuneration for your employees. What are the particular measures that you can provide to help staff with their costs? And the starting point is, well, what are you doing already? And to what extent do staff know about those benefits and are actually making the best use of those? And it's so often the case that you may have a scheme which allows for reimbursement of dental checks, reimbursement of annual health screening assessments, but actually the take up by your staff is very low on it. So the first thing to do is publicize what you've got in place already. Have a review of what there is already. Are some of those benefits still relevant and useful? Are there other benefits which would be a good thing to add to the range? Think about discount schemes with local businesses if you don't have those already. If you can get 10%, 20% off the local sandwich shops, their local hairdressers, everybody's a winner. You're getting well in with your local businesses around you. You're doing your staff a good favour at the same time. Think about free meals, subsidised meals and snacks. For example, setting up a breakfast club. So if staff want to come in at 8 o'clock and you're laying on breakfast for them, or indeed providing lunches as well. It may be you're on an industrial estate and you can subsidise them to go to a canteen on the industrial estate. Again, there's a useful tax exemption under ITEPA. No tax charge if providing meals for employees on your premises or at a canteen, provided you meet the various conditions. Reasonable scale, it's got to be open to all your employees. If you're a hotel or catering business, there needs to be a sort of staff use only area. Again, not part of salary sacrifice. There was a nice line in the HMRC guidance which says, provision of a glass of wine with an otherwise modest meal is not unreasonable when it comes to the tax exemption. So that was one for your work events, which we were looking at in Parliament yesterday. Nice bottle of wine to go with your meal. Working lunches. There may also be some additional tax efficiencies if you're providing or running a working lunch where there is a business purpose outweighing the social aspect. So you can have a sort of lunch and learn session, provide the pizzas whilst where staff are there, and so that can then be tax deductible from the business's point of view, as well as obviously not being a taxable benefit for the staff. Mobile phones, if they're provided primarily for business use, private use not being significant, exempt from tax anyway. But there's a sort of lesser known tax exemption which allows employers to provide a single mobile phone per employee for private use, not supposed to include family or household. But there could be a general benefit of the idea of, we want all our staff to be contactable by mobile phone so that they can send you that message to say that they're stuck in traffic on their way to work, for example. And it's generally a way that they are maintaining contact. So there is that particular tax exemption around mobile phones. Think about staff welfare benefits. Generally, there's what they call a trivial benefits exemption under the tax legislation, where the cost of providing benefit doesn't exceed £50. So that, for example, that could allow you as an employer to provide free feminine hygiene products for your staff without having to worry about that being a taxable benefit. Last one I mentioned there, the idea of swap sessions. So some businesses are doing that as a bit of a charity fundraising event, but it also serves that social benefit for staff. So, for example, a session where staff can come in and exchange children's clothes and toys. So it's helping them generally, and it's a byproduct of that may well be, you know, that you're supporting local charities with, you know, whatever's left at the end of the day, or whatever funds are raised for from that event. So that was the second limb of the pyramid, if you like, or second side of the triangle. So moving really to the third side, this is the under the heading of support and well-being. So what can you as an employer be doing on this front? So the first is generally around money and debt advice. You know, obviously you're not there to be resolving individuals' issues and problems for them, but as well as being sympathetic to those situations, you can really work and operate as a bit of a signpost for them. So some ideas here is, one, you could perhaps run workplace sessions, particularly if you like focused towards your more junior employees who may not have the life skills to be managing their budgets. So sort of financial education programs. How would you work through budgeting, giving them money saving tips. So think about being a signpost towards organisations such as the Citizens Advice. You know, there'll be various local debt charities as well, various government websites and national charity websites that you can signpost staff towards as well. Again, I've given you the website there for Money Helper. So that's a government website. There used to be things called the sort of Money Advice Service, the Pensions Advisory Service, and they've sort of unified those into a single site now. And it's a really useful site. It sort of covers a whole range of things like eligibility for Social Security benefits. There's lots of online calculators. There's a budget planner to help get in control of your household spending, sort of routes towards confidential advice for helping with debts. And there's a whole pension side and saving money side of things as well. Debt advice, again, may be part of an employee assistance program. So that's something which many employers are already providing and increasingly doing so. So, you know, covering a whole load of counselling and support services, you know, whether it's sort of mental health issues, welfare counselling, but also as covering financial counselling as well. And again, usefully, benefit of that is exempt from any tax charge as well. Counselling services generally exempt from tax and national insurance. And the last area really, and this is the one which doesn't necessarily come with a price tag, but is perhaps the most important area of activity and effort that you can participate in as an employer, and that is to take away or do what you can towards taking away the whole stigma and embarrassment and sense of guilt that comes around money worries and debt. So just some statistics here. This is from WageStream, who did a research report last year called The State of Financial Wellbeing. 68% of UK employees with money worries don't tell their employer. 76% of employees who suffer negative effects from the cost of living crisis, such as stress or worsening mental health, again, not telling their employer. So those are the barriers which are in reality out there, which as an employer, you want to, it's in your interest to try and help break down those barriers. Much the same way as in recent years, many employers have been working towards challenging the stigmas and taboos around issues like mental health problems, around dependencies. And what you can do as a business is to, if you like, learn many of those lessons and deploy many of those same tactics and principles around those. Again, remembering, like with dependencies, there's a whole legacy when it comes to debt and financial problems. There's a whole legacy of thinking of, you know, if somebody's got financial problems, they must be somebody who is bad at managing their finances. You know, that it's the bad with money, good with money mentality there. But the reality, and I say many employees are recognizing this, the reality is that anybody can fall into financial hardship in the same way that anyone can sort of run into mental health problems. Anybody may well run into dependency problems as well, for a very wide range of reasons, often entirely beyond their own control, beyond their sphere of responsibility. Again, to mention the fact that there may well, very often, also cultural beliefs around financial affairs. You know, it's one of those last areas of secrecy and taboo that, you know, that's one of the topics that you don't talk about with other people, you don't talk about with your friends, let alone talking about with your manager or with your employers or your workmates. So again, those sort of cultural, you've just got to be aware that there's that cultural mindset which discourages an openness about talking about financial affairs. And talking about mental health, you know, there is an obvious correlation there between an employee's mental health and their financial problems, and there's a real danger of a vicious spiral there. You know, the more somebody is sort of beset by their financial worries, that's going to prey on their mental health as well. And it's also, there's also, again, this data I read which says this was a Mental Health and Income Commission report in 2020, saying that people who struggle with mental health in the first place are 3 times more likely to have problems with debt. So again, be aware as an employer of the particular connections and correlations between mental health and financial concerns and financial worries as well. So I mentioned your approaches which you can develop towards challenging sort of financial stigma can positively draw on the actions which best practice employers are taking towards addressing mental health stigma. So look at things like having express policies which deal with those topics. So, you know, alongside your sort of health and well-being policies, you might want to think about a financial well-being policy. So it's sending out a very clear message. You know, as an employer, you know, we are committed to be supporting you to help you through your well-being, so your financial situations. You know, we as an employer recognize the impact which your financial concerns and your financial worries are going to have upon you as an individual, so on your well-being, and in turn upon how you perform as an employee in the workplace. Think about, you know, introducing the whole question and awareness of cost of living elsewhere within your communications as an employer. Start to get in the habit of normalizing conversations about financial worries, you know, whether it's sort of picking up on external prompts. You know, you've read about you know, what happened with inflation figures yesterday. You've read about interest rates going up. So, you know, just having casual conversations where you are, you know, as a manager, as a HR person, whoever it is, that you are sensitive and aware of the impact of cost of living on other people. Equally, using some internal prompts. You know, when you're having conversations about pay reviews, you're having your one-to-one sessions, again, you know, start having that attitude of being open to talk about these conversations. I suppose there is a concern that you're going to start that conversation and put yourself size 12 feet in it and say the wrong thing. But I would have thought saying the wrong thing is not as bad as saying nothing at all and giving the impression that you're totally oblivious and simply don't care of the reality of the world out there for your staff. So start to, you know, get into that habit of expressing concern, empathy, sympathy, and if you can, what you're trying to do is to remove that stigma, remove that scenario of the employees suffering in silence, suffering in isolation, you know, being alone in their battles of you know, where do I start to fight, you know, that bill coming in here, that debt which has arisen over there. And the sooner that your employees can sort of feel able to sort of reach out and be seeking help from you, and seeking support from whoever it is, the debt charity, from the CAB, from the government website, the sooner that they can make those positive steps, the better for them. Again, I've read about this idea of having some sort of buddy schemes or money champions. So you might have some particular, in the same way that you've sort of got mental health first aiders, so that there are particular individuals in your organization who are going out of their way, and maybe with a bit of training behind them, they're going out of their way to be visible and approachable, and having that time to help signpost colleagues, obviously on a very entirely confidential and confidential basis, able to signpost those colleagues in positive directions. Again, just a last thought there is, you know, maybe think about just doing a bit of a cost of coming to work audit. So sort of step back and think, okay, we know what the cost as an employer to employ our staff is going to be, you know, because we can tot out what the costs of, you know, salary, national insurance, benefits, pension, etc. But what does it cost typically one of our employees to come into work? You know, how much are they having to spend on you know, the clothes that they need to wear to be coming to work? What are they spending for when it comes to lunch and buying sandwiches? What are they spending on their travel costs? What are their childcare costs which they're running up? So it's just an idea to get that wider picture, so that you're fully on board of where your staff are. So there we are. So three broad sides of that triangle as to what you can do as an employer and I'd say I don't claim to have any monopoly of good ideas, and so the more I read, the more I come up or I have conversations, you sort of hear, oh, that's another good idea that somebody's coming up with. So just be receptive to other ideas as to what everybody else is doing, but broadly around those areas of, you know, what can we do on the pay front, what can we do on the benefits / reducing staff costs side, what can we be doing on the whole topic of well-being and providing support and removing that stigma around debt. So there we go. Thank you everybody for your time and attention, and hopefully
Excellent.
any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Patrick. Very, very comprehensive. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm aware that we're running very, very tight to time today. Are there any quick questions from the floor, or can I put you in contact with Patrick subsequently? Do we have any questions, please, ladies and gentlemen? Right, none there. That was very, very good then, Patrick. You've obviously answered every single question. I need now to introduce Ellie, and we've got another 15 minutes, Ellie. So please, if you could commence your presentation. Thank you.
No problem. I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully.
Thank you.
One second.
Don't worry, yeah, we'll stay with you.
Fortunately, today I'm here just to give you a sort of high-level overview of hidden disabilities. Hidden disabilities is a massive subject, and there's no possible way that I could go into every detail. And I suspect, actually, you guys don't really need that. You just need me to give you a high-level view of what the situation is and some practical steps. So hidden disabilities really came into the fore during the pandemic. We really started to become aware of them because people were wearing the sunflower lanyards. And also post-pandemic, unfortunately, lots of conditions like depression and so on have massively increased. And so it's now estimated that of all the disabilities, 80% are hidden or non-visible. So I'm going to look very briefly at what amounts to a disability, the duty imposed on employers. I'm going to dispel some common myths and also give you some practical steps. So Section 6 of the Equality Act, that sets out what a disability is. So it's someone who has a disability, which is a physical or mental impairment, and that impairment has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on the individual's ability to carry out their normal day-to-day activities. I've broken down the definition on the slide here. So it's basically something that prevents them from doing or makes it harder for them to do certain activities. The condition, importantly, has to be long-lasting. So in the context of the Equality Act, we're looking at a condition that has lasted for 12 months or is likely to last for 12 months. Just quickly to note that I'm going to talk about employees, and I mean that in the broad sense of the word. If this, the Equality Act applies in England, Wales and Scotland, but not Northern Ireland. So if that is important for you, or you're based in Northern Ireland, I suspect not, as we're talking to people in Kent, but it's just something to flag up. There's slightly different legislation in Northern Ireland. So conditions which are disabilities, there are some which are automatically a disability. So for example, cancer, HIV, multiple sclerosis. So even if the condition doesn't impair their ability to do their day-to-day activities, they are automatically covered by the Equality Act. There are some conditions which are specifically excluded. So if you have addiction to alcohol or drugs, then you are not disabled for the purposes of the Equality Act. Same again with hay fever, which for me is a problem because I do get really bad hay fever. Sorry, Andrew, I'm just flagging that up. So hidden disabilities, it's such a wide-ranging class of issues. So they can be physical, they can be mental, and also to do with your neurodiversity. Why does it matter? Well, disability is a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. So this means that you cannot discriminate against somebody who has a disability. Also, employers are under a positive obligation in order to make adjustments for those who are suffering from a disadvantage at work due to their disability. So in the workplace, if their condition causes them to suffer from a disadvantage, like, for example, they can't comply with certain time limits, then the employer must make a reasonable adjustment in those circumstances. So the adjustment, whether it's reasonable or not, will depend on many factors, and it is absolutely case specific. So it will depend on the individual, how they are suffering from the disability, the size of the employer, the cost of the adjustment, and so on and so on. You may well have to draw on information from outside sources. So for example, occupational health specialists, but it's really important to keep an open mind and also importantly, not make assumptions about how that person is feeling. So when it comes to disability, it's really important not to stick your head in the sand as an employer. Because in certain cases, for example, with reasonable adjustments, if there was enough of enough clues that this person was potentially disabled, and you didn't make reasonable inquiries in order to find out whether or not they're disabled, then you could still have constructive knowledge of disability. So even if your head is firmly in the sand and you've decided not to take any notice of disability, then I'm afraid you could still be liable for a failure to make reasonable adjustments, which ultimately means money. So we're going to quickly look at some myths. So number one, can we ask employees about their health? Well, yes, you can. Many people think you can't, and that's not the case. Pre-employment, you have to be very careful about what you ask, but you can ask information if it's for the purposes of making reasonable adjustments, for example. Once they're employed, employers can ask questions about health, but only if it's relevant. And of course, it needs to be done really sensitively. It needs to be done in such a way that you comply with your data protection obligations as well. Because if you information about a person's health, of course, is going to be very important and very sensitive, so it needs to be controlled properly. So myth number 2, the employee has to declare their disability. Well, no, that is not the case. I represent individuals occasionally, and actually I encourage people to make it clear to people that make it clear to their employer that they are disabled. So because then we can be absolutely clear that the equality legislation applies. But there is no requirement for them to disclose disability. And also in some cases, the employee themselves may not realise they actually have a disability. Myth number 3. So the employee generally seems fine, so they can't be disabled. Well, no, that is absolutely not the case. I have a very good friend who suffers from a liver complaint. She takes her medicine and she bounces off the walls. She is in rude health. But actually, when you take away the effect of the medication, she would be extremely ill. So she is disabled for the purposes of the Equality Act. So when we're establishing if somebody is disabled, you take away the effect or discount the effect of any medication, treatment, or indeed coping mechanisms or strategies. I've given you an example there of a dyslexic employee. So if you take away all of the things that they put in place to make sure they can do their job, are they suffering a disadvantage? And in this example, yes, they would be. So practical steps. Well, first of all, I mean, this follows on very firmly from Patrick's talk. It's really important to have a welcoming and sort of open and sensitive environment, so that your employees feel capable of disclosing that they have an impairment or there's something that they're finding difficult. You can also put in practical steps like mental health first aiders. That's something that we have here at Furley Page. To make sure that people don't fall through the cracks, that there are checks and balances in place for making sure that people remain tip-top. It's really important to have good training. So make sure that your staff are aware of what could amount to a hidden disability. And also, just generally speaking, they need to be aware of equality legislation. This helps make sure that we identify issues early on so that we can put things in place to help support your staff. For managers, it's going to be important that they look out for warning signs. So, for example, has performance dropped? Do they look? Has their appearance changed? When you see these warning signs, it's really important then to start start asking questions. So speak with the individual concerned in a sympathetic and obviously very sensitive manner. It might be necessary to go and speak with their line manager. Perhaps you need to get some advice from occupational health or some other treating doctor. It's also important, particularly if you have got reasonable adjustments in place, or you think that they might need to be in place in the future, that you assess it regularly. Disability doesn't stand still. You know, none of us stand still. Our ability to be able to perform peaks and dips over time. So it's really important to assess it and, you know, just make sure you know your staff and so that you can identify these issues early on. I think it's also really important to say, this is my last point, don't be afraid to make adjustments. It doesn't really matter ultimately if the individual is disabled or not. What we're trying to achieve is if an employee is not performing quite as you would hope, is to put those adjustments in place to support them so that they can thrive and that they then, you know, they're a supported and happy employee. And once they are supported and happy, then they will perform brilliantly for you. So that really was a whistle-stop tour. I'm very happy to answer any questions either now or after the fact.
Ellie, thank you so much. I'm acutely aware that we're running over time, ladies and gentlemen, and I sincerely apologise. But Patrick was very, very, very thorough. So thank you for that. We have a question from Tony Locke. How should an employer behave in the instance where an individual's disability comes to light after they've been employed, in particular ADHD, depression?
I think the first step. Oh.
Thank you. Yes, Ellie.
Yes, I think a first step is to, well, I mean, when you become aware, the first step is to have a conversation and to try and understand how that condition is affecting them, what kind of measures the individual thinks would be helpful to help them then perform in the workplace. So then looking at adjustments, it might be that in that case that you would need to get some external help just to understand the extent of the impairment, how it affects them on a, you know, their ability to perform their day-to-day activities.
That's really useful. And I think from Tony's perspective, Tony, do please unmute. It's always a difficult one where an employee is seeking work and they may not wish to admit to depression because of the stigma and because of the lack of education around certain conditions. And it does put employees in an unenviable position because it's that distinction between master and servant, isn't it? So a very tricky one. An excellent question, Tony. Did you want to ask anything further of Ellie whilst you have her attention?
Is it okay from an employee point of view? If an employer asks a question because they are worried about that individual's performance and feel that there's something underlying that's affecting it, what if the employee says, "No, I'm fine"?
Well, I think it's important to ask sensitive questions around the situation. So maybe not directly what's wrong with you, but how's everything going at home? You know, is this an issue? And then if they still don't want to disclose that there's an issue, that is their prerogative. Mm-hmm. But it's important to document that you've asked those questions, you've tried to support them, you've asked, is there anything that we can do to support you?
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you, Ellie.
That's really useful. I'm so sorry, Furley Page. We're beginning to lose people because we've overrun in terms of time. We will be making the slides available for you. If anyone would like to contact either Patrick, Ellie, or Mr. Andrew Masters, do come back. I'm happy to connect you on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect you via email if that would be useful. It only remains for me to say very hurriedly, thank you so much to the team at Furley Page. That was extraordinarily comprehensive, and I learned things today which is useful, especially about the lunches. So I hope everybody else gained something from that. Again, many thanks to our own team here at Kent and Victor Chamber for Annie's time in orchestrating all the right buttons, and most of all to you guys for joining us. It's been absolutely super to have you with us. If anybody has any questions about the services from the Chamber, don't hesitate to reach out to me. It remains for me to wish you all a very good forward day. I've been Kaz Macklin for Kent Invicta Chamber of Commerce with Furley Page. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Furley Page, if you could stay with us, please.